Okay, welcome to this recording. Here's the plan for the second video on our heart chapter, and this time we're focusing on the physiological aspects. As you can see from this short summary, I'm gonna skip through the discussion on the oxygenated versus deoxygenated blood. We've already had that chat earlier on. And I also think that we've already looked at the flow of the blood through the heart in the last video. So you can refer to that if you have any questions about that. So let's make a start with the material that I do want to cover, however. So what I wanted to start with is discussing the cardiac cycle. And with the cardiac cycle, we're referring to one complete heartbeat covering all the stages of forming it. So the process of both atria and both ventricle that go as they go through squeezing the blood out and then filling up again. So this brings us a couple of important terms that we do want to be familiar with. And let's start with this. So the period of contraction of a heart chamber is known as that chamber being in systole. So when it squeezes, pushing the blood out. And the period of relaxation of the heart chamber is known as that chamber being in diastole. So that is the period during which it fills. So I often think of diastole as being dilated and systole as being squeezed. So now that we have those basic terms, I think we're ready to move on to review the different stages of the cardiac cycle. Let's have a look at that. So the first stage of cardiac cycle is known as our atrial diastole and ventricular filling. During this stage, the heart is relaxed and the pressure in the heart is low. The atrioventricular valves are open while the semilunar valves are closed. As a result of this, the blood is now flowing passively into the atria and ventricles. Then, during the second stage, which is known as atrial systole, the ventricles remain nice and relaxed in diastole, ready to receive blood, as the atria are now contracting. As a result, the blood is being pushed from atria to the ventricles, and ventricles are now full of blood. As we move to the third stage of the cardiac cycle, which is known as isovolumetric contraction, we're seeing that now the atria have stopped contracting and the atrioventricular valves close. Ventricles instead now start to contract. And for a brief moment, the ventricles are completely closed chambers, and the pressure within the ventricles rises. This helps us to move now to the fourth stage, known as ventricular systole, or also referred as an ejection phase. So here the ventricles continue to contract, and now as a result of the intraventricular pressure surpassing the pressure in the major arteries leaving the heart, as a result the semilunar valves open. Blood is now ejected from the ventricles to the arteries. And simultaneously, the atria are relaxed and filling with blood in preparation for the next heartbeat. The final and the fifth stage is known as isovolumetric relaxation. Here, the ventricular diastole begins, so these chambers are now relaxed. And the pressure in them falls below that of in the major arteries. As a result, the semilunar valves now close. For another moment, the ventricles are completely closed chambers. Instead, the atria are filling, and when the atrial pressure increases above that of the intraventricular pressure, as a result of the AV valves will then open. And that is our full cardiac cycle, all of the events of one heartbeat. Now, let's discuss also what we can hear with a stethoscope during this process. We often listen to patients' chest for sounds that will tell us what is happening within the cardiac cycle. So we use stethoscope for this. We will hear two noises, lub-dup, followed by a pause, and again lub-dup. These sounds tell us what the heart valves are doing and which heart valves are closing. So the first sound is created when the AV valves slam close. This is longer, louder heart sound, signaling that atria have emptied and the pressure is building within the ventricles. The second sound that we're going to hear is when the semilunar valves slam close. This is shorter and a sharp heart sound, signaling the ending of a ventricular systole. And there is going to be pause in between, which indicates the heart being now in relaxation stage. And we can get even more information about these heart sounds by carefully placing the stethoscope strategically to different places on the chest. So this helps us to isolate the sounds of each heart valve more clearly. We will still hear all of these heart sounds, but one that is now closest to us is the heart valve that we're hearing the loudest. And as the next thing that I wanted to discuss, I wanted to talk a little bit about various issues with heart valves. So let's look at the abnormal heart sounds and what they tell us about the valves. So we typically hear these when the blood hits an obstruction on its path. And typically this is an indicative of a heart valve problem. So the first example that we're looking at is what's known as an incompetent or insufficient valve. Here the valve is not closing correctly. As a result, a little bit of it remains open, so a little bit of blood flows backwards to the direction that it should not. And this causes really non-productive pumping of the blood, as we end up pumping some of the same blood back and forth through this opening where there shouldn't be an opening. So the pumping of the blood is not now as effective as it should be. And this is heard as this swishing sound with a stethoscope. The second example that I provided here is what's known as stenotic valve. Here a heart valve fails to open completely. So when it should open completely, it just is opened narrowly. So it remains slightly narrowed even when it's supposed to be fully open. As a result, the heart now has to work harder to squeeze the full volume of the blood through this smaller than supposed to be opening. And we will hear this as a high-pitched sound, or sometimes this kind of a clicking sound with a stethoscope. So that's why we really use the stethoscopes to listen what's going on. Now, let's shift gears and discuss a little bit more about the mechanisms behind everything we're seeing. So far we have seen that the heart chambers need to contract in a specific pattern in order to ensure that the blood flows in a direction that we want it to go. So this would be one way only, through the heart. In order for us to accomplish this, there is a specific pattern that needs to be created. And this is where the internal electrical conduction system of the heart becomes crucial. Let's look at that. So everything starts from the SA node, which is really a cluster of nerve cells located at the roof of the right atria. These are our pacemaker of the heart. Essentially, they initiate the electrical impulses that led to the contraction of the heart chambers. And as a next step, we're seeing that these nerve impulses pass through the walls of the atria, and as they do so, they cause atria to contract. As atria contracts, now blood starts to flow from the right atria and left atria to the ventricles on their respective sides. Notice, however, that we need to give sufficient time for the blood flow from the atria to the ventricles. So this electrical conduction would be way too fast to proceed unless we have a special adaptation. And we do. So, and this adaptation is going to be our AV node. The AV node holds the electrical impulses here for a while before letting them continue. This way, blood has enough time to empty from the atria to the ventricles. And also the AV node strengthens the signal a little bit. So in a sense, it serves as this relay station for the signal. And now, after we have held the electrical impulse in the AV node, we are ready for it to pass forward within the interventricular septum along the AV bundle, which is also known as a bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers. So the electrical conduction simply passes towards the apex, but does not cause the muscle tissue to start to contract at this area. And as a final step, the electrical impulse now propagates along the outer ventricular walls, causing the ventricles now to contract. So the blood is pushed out of the ventricles towards the pulmonary trunk and aorta. So the blood leaves the heart. And this is really the pattern that we see kind of controlling that cardiac cycle that we just talked about, the electrical impulses that make it possible. Now, let's consider some things where this can go wrong. So sometimes what happens is that we have defects in this intrinsic conduction system. So the electrical messages do not propagate correctly, and as a result, the blood flow through the heart is not successful. And so we can have irregular heart rhythm, known as arrhythmia. One type of this is what's known as myocardial fibrillation, where they are very, very rapid, irregular contractions. And as a result, the blood does not move correctly through the heart. So the heart is kind of all over the place in terms of the contractions that are taking place. Well, what we can do, we can use automated external defibrillator, AED, to shock the heart. By delivering this electrical shock through the heart, we hope that we are able to reestablish the beating pattern that needs to take place. Another option that we sometimes see is that patients who have frequently issues with this is that they get an implanted pacemaker. This delivers a shock via these metal cords that are wrapped around the heart. So now going back to this slide where we see the normal, so I guess the correct pattern of electrical conduction through the heart. My question to you is that would it be great if we had somehow a way to measure these from outside the heart? And indeed we do. And this detecting the electrical currents within the heart is exactly what we can do with EKG, or sometimes abbreviated also as ECG. This method involves placing a number of LEDs across the chest, thus allowing us to form kind of a three-dimensional view of the electricity within the heart. And this tells us about how the conduction is happening, if there's necrotic tissue, and so on and so on. So let's look at this trace that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen and figure out a little bit more what's happening there. So when we're reading these traces, we're really looking for three elements. Let's review those. First of these is going to be our P wave. This is the first bump. And this tells us that this SA node and atria have depolarized, so they are contracting. So blood is flowing out of the atria to the ventricles. And now we get to the second element. This QRS complex is a series of three rapid peaks kind of packed together. They tell us that the ventricles are now depolarizing, so contracting, while the atria are repolarizing, so returning back to this resting stage. And finally, we're also going to see T wave as the final bump on a single heartbeat's EKG. This tells us that the ventricles depolarize, so return to the resting stage, if you wish. So what we can do, we can look from the EKG for presence of these elements, the direction that they face, any abnormalities, durations of these, and also durations in between. So there's a lot of clinical information about how the heart is working that we can get from these EKG traces. And I wanted to show two particular abnormalities that we can pick up. So here we see three EKG traces, and the first one is obviously the normal one, what we would expect to see. The second one that we're seeing is tachycardia. This is abnormally rapid heart rate. I would say over 100 beats per minute is characteristic for it. And the third one is our bradycardia, abnormally slow heart rate. And here we're seeing less than 60 beats per minute. So a few different things that we can look there. And I wanted to wrap up this video by discussing a little bit about cardiac output. So cardiac output is dependent on our heart rate and our stroke volume. And that gives us this formula that you're seeing on the screen inside this box. And as you know from the math, as long as we know two of these elements, we can figure out the missing one. So let's unpack this a little bit. So cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped by each side, so each ventricle of the heart in 1 minute. And typically at rest, this would be about 5.25 liters per minute. Stroke volume instead is the volume of blood pumped by each ventricle in one contraction, so in each heartbeat. And typically this is about 70 milliliters. Heart rate then is the number of heartbeats per minute, and typically I would say it's about 75 beats per minute. So as we saw from the math, normally cardiac output is approximately 5.25 liters per minute. If we remember that there was about 5 liters of blood in an average sized human, we see that all of the blood is circulated in the body in 1 minute. This cardiac output number can, however, grow drastically during the periods of, for example, intense exercise. It can go up to 20 to 25 liters per minute. So quite a growth that can take place there. And that brings us to the end of everything that I wanted to talk about heart physiology. Normally, I would also talk about congestive heart failure, but for the purposes and interest of the time, I will skip that for now from our material. I look forward to seeing you in our final session where we'll discuss about the blood vessels very briefly, but we'll still discuss them. Until then, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.